Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you to all of you for being here today. Secretary Modly, in your opening statement, you indicated that you are committed to stamping out sexual harassment in the Navy. And yet last February, you promoted a man named Ronnie Booth to head the Navy's audit agency, even though there had been multiple whistleblowers and complainants that had come forward documenting his workplace sexual harassment retaliation dating back to 2007. Alarmingly, many people reported him wanting to offer to mentor female subordinates, suggested they meet outside of work, arrange travel with them. This man is the person you chose to lead a major naval agency. I wrote your office asking about these concerns, and then Secretary Spencer responded by saying there was no documented, substantiated evidence of Mr. Booth's behavior. Yet, following my letter, Mr. Booth was reassigned to work as a special assistant and retired shortly thereafter. Would you please indicate to us how that squares?
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate the question, and I remember your letter very clearly. Let me say that that situation was part of a broader cultural and climate problem that I had at the Naval Audit Service. I had to take action to remove somebody and move somebody into a position of authority in that organization. I did it very methodically and very carefully. There, if I may, well, I was not aware, when we made that decision, we went back and followed all the rules in terms of what can restrict you from putting somebody in a position of that place. There was no documented evidence, no IG investigations, nothing.
There were complaints that had been filed. How can you say there was no documented evidence?
There was no documented evidence in his individual record that prohibited me from doing that. When I found out about this, thanks to your letter and to some emails that came to me, we immediately started an internal investigation. The DOD started an internal, broader investigation, and we were told to shut down our investigation on that. Okay?
Who told you to shut it down?
The DOD IG. Because once they started an investigation, we can't have a parallel investigation.
I see, because they were now investigating.
That's
I guess the real question is, why did it take a letter from me that then triggered an Inspector General evaluation?
Because there was no evidence before I found that.
Well, I find it hard to believe if there are complaints that are filed that that's not considered evidence. Let me ask you another question.
Well, may I say something else about this?
No, well,
if
maybe
the suggestion is that I would ever
for the record.
Ms. Modly, she controls the time. I'm sympathetic because she has the right to ask the questions she wants to ask, so let her ask.
In the budget proposal, the Navy has cut the SAPRO budget. How can you cut that budget when we have an epidemic on our hands?
Ma'am, I don't know the specifics in terms of how much we cut that budget, but I have been extremely committed to fighting sexual assault and harassment in the service.
Then why do you cut the budget? The numbers are up.
The numbers are up. We take it very seriously. The Navy, the Department of the Navy, actually initiated actions with other universities around the country to get after this problem, to share information and to share data. And I will just say, if the suggestion is that I would ever put a person in a position of authority knowing full well with documented evidence that that person was a sexual harasser, that would never happen. Well, I would never do that. And the suggestion, I think,
this is my time. I'd like to ask another question. The LCS turned out to be a debacle. Part of the problem was the cost estimates were way undervalued. They were first supposed to be $220 million apiece. They ended up costing 2.5 times that much. The GAO said you should do independent cost estimates. As of August of 2019, there has never been an independent estimate of the frigate. CBO thinks that the actual cost will probably exceed your estimates by about $300 million per ship. Seems like we need the benefit of an independent estimate. Are you intending to do that?
We intend to do, the LCS program predates me by many, many years. We intend to do independent cost estimates on every new platform that we're doing.
So the frigate will be subject to an independent cost estimate?
Yes.
All right, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to go off in a different direction. We had the NATO parliamentary meeting this last week, and there were kind of some things that were said there that were kind of scary to me, because some of the concerns in this committee were our ability, the number of ships to, if the balloon went up in Europe, our air refueling capability, which was a very contentious hearing here. Boeing did not have a good day, and I won't go into that. But the point that was made at this meeting here, and I'm a big NATO supporter and everything like that, it broke out that the EU was invited to speak. And they're talking, quite frankly, about taking over some of the aspects, the way I understood it, of the strategic forces under their cognizance. Now, we've had problems with the EU going from some of the different exercises, and the RAND study that a few years ago the Javelin missile and some of the other systems were based on some of these things. Now, if this is true, and it might be partly a reaction to Brexit, but there were a lot of countries that were alarmed at the fact that now the EU is going to make it very, very difficult if there are many of these countries, which are NATO members but also EU members, are not totally committed to NATO. Do you have any reactions, Mr. Secretary, at all, or have you heard any of the repercussions of that conference?
I have not been briefed on any of the repercussions of that conference and on these discussions, so I don't have a comment right now. I can find out more information on it and get back to you, sir.
Yeah, and the reason I raised this issue here, because we're talking about some of these funding issues. In the past, it was a situation in Korea, and it changes from day to day where the threat is. And by the way, I want to thank you for coming here. We learn a lot. I think we make changes. I remember when General Scaparrotti talked about the Air Force wanted to get rid of the U-2s. This was in Korea, and he said no. The U-2s had more reliability. Next thing you know, they're back in the budget. So some of the things that you say here have tremendous repercussions, at least in my decision-making, and I think everyone here. All I'm saying is that some of these other questions in terms of preparing, pre-positioning equipment and everything else, if this NATO situation is going to be revisited in terms of perhaps conflicts with the EU, I think it might affect some of the things, our budget decisions in this committee. The Admiral or General, do you have any comments on that? I think you're familiar with those.
So I just say I take your point. There are two different political bodies that make different decisions that are not always synchronized, and there's a potential risk. I think your point is to NATO. I just am not familiar with the context of last week's discussions in Brussels.
Yeah, it was on class, and you can probably see everything. General Berger, I never thought I'd be happy about the day that we're not getting a new weapon systems or anything else, but right now in the president's budget, we have the sewer plant for 29 Palms. This combat Marine, that's his greatest accomplishment, was to get the sewer plant for 29 Palms. But it really, really is a big deal because of the environmental concerns in California. And something like that I think it's one of the greatest training bases in the world. And it's an admin thing, so I'm going to try and bring that all the way to fruition. So thank you very much for being here, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony here today. I'm really proud of the efforts in the Department of Defense, our uniformed services, in integrating our force and leading this nation by example. Started in the 1940s, executive orders that removed racial barriers to service, the work that has happened over the years for inclusion of women in now every aspect of the military. It's hard to believe that it took an act of Congress just last year to finally get the Marine Corps to include women in basic training platoons. But you know, sometimes it's come easy, and sometimes it's been a little bit more of a challenge. But I think we can all take pride in the progress that we've made. Mr. Secretary, I really, really want to thank you for the historic decision that you made in naming an aircraft carrier after an enlisted soldier, recognizing the important contributions that enlisted men and women make to the force, and to naming that aircraft carrier after Cook First Class Doris Miller. So thank you very much for that. Having said what I've just said, we've got a problem. We've got a problem in both the civilian staffing and in uniform staffing in both the Navy and the Marines, and particularly in what I call the elite sectors, such as your fighter squadrons. Looking at your civilian staffing, you stated in your statement on page 17 regarding recruiting, curating, and retaining the best talent that you're leveraging leading private sector business practices. But in your human capital strategy for 2019 to 2030, there's only one mention of diversity in that strategy. Mr. Secretary, what are you doing to ensure that you are diversifying the civilian workforce at the Department of Navy?
Mr. Brown, thanks. First of all, thank you for the compliment on the Doris Miller. I really appreciate that, and agree with you in terms of the historical significance of it. And I will tell you that as great a day as it was for the family of Doris Miller, it was an even greater day for the Navy. So just a wonderful moment for us as a country. We have challenges with this, sir. We've talked about this in your office before, about the challenges we have, particularly on the uniform side. As people progress through the service, we don't have a lot of diversity in the senior ranks. We have pretty good diversity in the civilian ranks. It's interesting that you noted that. I did not note that when I read through the human capital strategy. I'll have to look through that again. But the whole concept of our human capital strategy is to try to attract people from a variety of different areas, new types of people, new thinking, more diverse thinking, give them ways to come in and serve in the government, perhaps go back out. So I will look in specifically.
Yeah, so let me just suggest then, if in your statement, you suggest that you're taking leading private sector business practices, I think in this regard, the private sector is well out in front of your strategy. So I would ask you to go back and look. Let's turn to the uniform service. Both the Marine Corps and the Navy, you have a serious problem in your fighter units, your fighter pilots. You have in the Navy 710 Navy fighter pilots, 17 or less than 3% are African American and not a single woman. You have 735 Marine Corps fighter pilots, less than 1% or five are African American, one woman. You've got claims of equal opportunity violations, inspector general reports. You have flag officers who are making inappropriate public comments, undermining the integrity of the EO process and the inspector general process. And I've sent a letter to the secretary to that regard. You have pilots, an African-American pilot who has left the service, another whose record is still tarnished and will inhibit his promotion, a whistleblower who is still on the edge waiting an outcome of a report. And the concern is that the initial EO complaints substantiated that there were racial discrimination against these pilots. And then for some unexplained reason, it was reversed. And now you have 3 people sitting on pins and needles, wondering the fate of their future because you have these outstanding complaints. So you take the numbers alone, the lack of diversity and conclusion by race and gender, you've got these terrible cases in front of you, and you have a pilot shortage to boot. You've got a lot of work to do. So I'll take it for the record what your response will be, because I did submit a letter to you back in January, and I'm waiting for the response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you. Secretary Moodley, so in the last 24 hours, we've learned that you have delivered the Integrated Naval Force Structure Assessment to the Secretary of Defense. He wants some time to evaluate that, potentially compare it against some alternative assessments that are out there, whether they're in CAPE or he alluded to outside assessments, and that is why we don't have the 30-year shipbuilding plan, because it would be informed by the Integrated Naval Force Structure Assessment. But over the last 4 years, we've done a lot of outside studies. A lot of us have committed to, not only rhetorically, but put it into law that we need a 355-ship fleet. We believe that to be a floor, not a ceiling. So could you help us put into perspective what the total ownership costs of a 355-ship Navy would be in constant dollars over the current fleet of about 293 ships?
So as we've looked at this in terms of, as we use the Integrated Naval Force Structure Assessment as our benchmark, as sort of our North Star in terms of where we think we should go as the Department of the Navy, and understand that the Secretary of Defense has not signed off on that or has not bought into it yet. In order to get there on an accelerated path, which would approximate getting to that ideal force structure in 10 years, it's probably, if you assume a flatline budget for us, it's probably going to take between $120 and $130 billion more total over that 10 years. Those are the initial cuts we're looking at, initial numbers that we're looking at. So that's basically what it comes down to.
So per year, it would be fair to say that would be well north of $8 billion.
Yeah, we're looking, that's the reason why I put this benchmark out for our teams to look at how do we get $8 billion out of the top line that we have right now, so at least we can start moving down that path.
Thank you. Admiral Gilday, I couldn't help but notice that the budget for the new frigate now reflects 1 ship per year over the first 3 years of production. Can you assure me that the Navy remains fully committed to executing this program to achieve the 20 ships briefed to this committee previously?
Yes, sir. We're committed to that number. I think that 1 frigate in the first year is prudent. We need to get this right. There have been comments made about LCS and other programs, and so we're focused on making sure that that first ship puts us in a very good direction for the remainder of the class.
Secretary Motley, should the Columbia be a Navy bill?
Well, Rep. Gallagher, it is a Navy bill, and so we're assuming that it is a Navy bill. Obviously, it has strategic implications for the whole country, for the whole force, but right now it is a Navy bill.
Commandant Berger, in your planning guidance, you write about the importance of ground-based, long-range precision fires with no less than 350 nautical mile ranges, and you call for potentially we need more than that. Can you talk a bit about how central these long-range precision fires are to your planning guidance and executing the overall strategy, and what any restrictions on the ranges of missiles your Marines could employ would impact your ability to execute your vision?
The distributed maritime operations concept that we fit within means we do 2 things in support of the fleet commander: sea control and sea denial. The fires that you're speaking of, that capability allows us to do that, either embarked or ashore. Well, what's the value? The value to the fleet commander is he's not just hauling around Marines as passengers anymore. They are part of his fighting capability. We need the ability to reach out and hold at risk an adversary's naval fleet from wherever we are, embarked or ashore. Range limitations, you definitely want longer rather than shorter if you're going to outstick an opponent. So any restrictions on ranges of weapon systems, from our perspective, from a warfighting perspective, we're gonna push back on that. Then it becomes just a function of technology and weight, size. We have to be mobile. We have to be expeditionary.
Let me just follow on your planning guidance. Well, this is just a comment. Your planning guidance has sparked a lot of very useful discussion in forums like War on the Rocks among company-grade officers, field-grade officers. I know you're bought into this, but I just would please continue to encourage that. Make sure that those Marines who are challenging long-held assumptions aren't being punished when it comes time for them to be up for promotion, because I think this is a really healthy discussion going on in the Navy and the Marine Corps right now among all levels of officers and enlisted, and I'm really pleased to see that. Finally, just to end where we started, I've had a really, at times, contentious debate about waiting for the shipbuilding plan, and, there's a lot of frustration here. In 2017, we had 3 outside studies about the force structure and where we needed to go with the fleet. The next year, the NDS came out. 2 months later, in March 2018, the Navy came to this committee and testified that a new FSA was on its way. Then in September, the Navy said, wait, it's not coming until 2019. N9 said we'd have it by now last year. So please, just as soon as you can, tell us your vision for the future of the Navy and the Marine Corps in geopolitical terms. I think you will find a very receptive audience here, because it's hard for us to give you money until we know that vision.
Duly noted. Mr. Moulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to start by echoing my colleague and fellow Marine Mike Gallagher's comments about how important it is to encourage this discussion. And I would say not only should we make sure that these Marines aren't punished for being willing to question assumptions, they're exactly the people that we should be promoting, and promoting quickly. What you're doing is setting an important tone for the entire Department of Defense, Commandant. And we need the other services to do it too. We need to do it more. I'm the co-chairman with Representative Jim Banks, a Navy veteran of the Future Defense Task Force. We're trying to do that here on the Armed Services Committee to really question our assumptions. Because we are losing the game to Russia and China right now. That's the harsh reality. They are outpacing us, and that's why they're closing the gap. So we've got to keep doing this, and it's incredibly important. Of course, one of the challenges is literally staring at you on this committee, because about half the questions this morning, if my tally is correct, were essentially parochial questions about district priorities, not strategic questions about what we need for our Navy or Marine Corps. In other words, are my airplanes going to be okay at my local base, or my missile capability, is that going to be developed? How do you propose that we get around that challenge to your changes, and that we support your courageous willingness to slay sacred cows in order to make room for new and innovative weapon systems?
I think we owe you a couple things, sir. First of all, our assumptions about where the threat is, where the adversary will be in the future, which could change, because there's a series of assumptions that go into that. Second is a clear picture at the unclass, more valuable, the classified level of how we expect we will fight the joint force. Then a subset of that is how we will fight the naval force. Armed with that, you should be able to ask us, okay, now armed with that, the threat picture is this. I understand now how you think you're going to fight. Tell me how these capabilities that you're asking for, that you're on your shopping list, how do they fit into that mix?
So let me ask you, Commandant, about one specific capability, the CH-53. As you're aware, the Marine Corps has a proud tradition of generating overwhelming combat power with less manpower and less cost, but right now the per aircraft cost is set to exceed $120 million, which is $20 million more than a fifth-generation fighter, and many more orders of magnitude, rather, more expensive than proven alternatives such as the CH-47F. That is a very expensive toilet for a joke that only the Marines will get. What's going on here, and what do we need to do to fix it?
The lift requirement to move Marines and equipment and the naval force around remains valid. As distributed as we're going to be, we're going to need the ability to move that force and the sustainment around. So the requirement is valid, and it is 200 aircraft. The cost, to your point, the cost is the big factor. APUC right now, $107 million. Total flyaway costs, we're still a margin away from where it's an affordable aircraft, even to buy off the shelf, much less sustain over the long term. So we have a valid warfighting requirement. We have an affordability challenge. Now it's up to us negotiating with Sikorsky and Lockheed Martin to try to drive the cost down to where it's affordable by the department, affordable by the Marine Corps.
Okay, well, we will certainly support that. Mr. Secretary, I want to come back to a question that Representative Lamborn asked about whether hypersonics increase or decrease strategic stability. And you replied that we always want to increase strategic stability, which I heartily agree with, but it's sort of like acknowledging that the ocean has water in it, which you don't need to be the Secretary of the Navy to know. Explain to me how having a weapon, and understand, I'm supportive of innovative, future-focused capabilities, but how is having a weapon, especially one that is submarine launched, that you know is launched, but you don't know where it's going, and you don't know if it has a conventional or nuclear weapon on it. So in other words, you have to make a decision on how to respond to it, and a timeline similar to with an ICBM, except it's more compressed because you don't know where it's going. How does that increase strategic stability?
You need to explain that in 20 seconds, so go.
I'm sorry you didn't like my previous answer, but I think what it does is it creates more unpredictability that's true. It does, and that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a more unpredictable nature of our forces so that our
Mr. Chairman, I know
adversaries.
my time is up, but if we could take this for the record, I think that would be valuable, because I agree, it increases in unpredictability. My concern is that it also increases strategic instability, and we need to understand that more fully before we commit the kinds of funds we're talking about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll take note of my colleague's admonition about parochial questions, and so I'll ask my parochial question in as strategic a way as I possibly can. We're incredibly proud of the cyber warriors that we train up at Corey Station that go to serve the Navy, and so I was just wanting to give you the opportunity to reflect on the nature of the cyber mission and how it fits into this strategic paradigm that we're working on building.
Yeah, so, sir, thanks for the question, and thanks for the comments about those cyber warriors down at Corey. We think they're the best in the world, or among the best in the world. So we are not going to fight in one domain, and so we are leveraging those cyber warriors in terms of our concept of how we're going to fight in the future. We're about to do our largest exercise in a generation this summer. And as part of that exercise, we're going to include a cyber electronic warfare and space cell inside of our fleet commander's headquarters, and we're going to assign tactical offensive cyber teams to the fight. We haven't done that before. And so just two examples of how we're going to try to better integrate those capabilities into what we want to do in the future.
I also wanted to commend the Navy. We've got a lot of naval aviation going on in my community, and the TH-57 is a platform that needs to be retired. Every other day, we're having one of those helicopters come back on a truck because they're having to land them out in a peanut field or soybean field somewhere as a result of an alert. Folks should not have to train on analog and then go to digital, but the Navy has been very innovative in embracing off-the-shelf options, and I think that particularly at Whiting Field, we're going to see a replacement for the TH-57 that will be at lower cost and with greater utility for our naval aviators. My colleague, Mr. Gallagher, had some follow-up questions, so I'll yield to him the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Very generous. Just a quick follow-up for Secretary Modly. So you said that it's going to cost about 120 to 130 billion more over the next 10 years to get to 355 ships. Was that correct? And is that just acquisition costs, or is that the total?
No, that's everything. That's
everything. That's total.
Yes, sir.
Ownership costs. So that's
above our. If you assume a current flatline budget, this would be the incremental cost of getting to there. As you know, sir, we're kind of tapping out at about 305 ships. That's sort of what would be. If that flat line can sustain that 305 ship. If we want to accelerate to 355 within 10 years, based on the analysis that we've done, that's the incremental additional cost to not only acquire, but also to sustain those platforms.
okay. So in order to build a fleet that's about 20% bigger than the one we have now, it's going to be about, this is just back of the envelope, 7.5% more each year. But that you're saying that's
right.
That's your analysis.
That's
the total.
Yes, sir. That's because
man, train, build, equip,
that's
maintain,
correct.
modernize.
Right. And that has a lot to do with the mix, because we're not filling that gap with 50 aircraft carriers, right? We're looking at some smaller, more distributed types of ships that are less expensive, and that will help fill the gap over that time.
Great, thank you. And we all look forward to the Integrated Naval Force Structure Assessment when it arrives.
Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Horn.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us today. I want to, General Berger, I want to address my questions to you. When we're speaking about the needs and choices that we're going to have to make in terms of cost, especially looking forward in our needs for the next generation of aircraft and fighters. You have spoken repeatedly about the need for a balanced mix of manned and unmanned systems that includes unmanned aerial combat vehicles and low-cost attributable. I'm having aircraft that are disposable that can be used as targets. I can't get that word out today. Aircraft technologies. And when you talked about the stated requirements for the manned F-35s, while that's well known, the and as a matter of record, we haven't heard articulated requirements for the unmanned systems to be paired with the more technologically advanced aircraft, because we're clearly not going to use the F-35s for target practice. So my question is, do you intend to pursue a large number of lethal unmanned aerial systems, or per your comments in the command's planning guidance and other statements, or do you have another plan? Can you speak to that first?
I don't know today. We don't know today the number or the ratio. What we know is we got to move faster than we have in the past 3 or 4 years. Some use a metaphor or example of like a quarterback, where the manned platform, a ship or a plane, is sort of the quarterback with a whole bunch of unmanned, and the Air Force uses the term unmanned wingman. We need to move fast. Why? We can cover a lot more ground if it's a mix of manned and unmanned. It's also more survivable. We have got to complicate the adversary's collection and targeting problem. We are making it too simple when they're all manned. So it's not in a trying to reduce casualties mode as much as it is try to gain an advantage and maintain that. But our processes don't reward going out on the edge and replacing something with something you have today. But we have got to press the accelerator down. We got to move now. Initially, some hybrid of manned and unmanned, lightly manned. But in the end, it's going to be a hybrid of all of that. And if you're sitting on the other side in an adversary's radar screen, you can't tell the difference.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And to follow up on that, I think we're, in terms of strategic capabilities and cost and the balance, do you expect to include those needs in the next version of the aviation plan? When can we expect the requirements for that? Because, as you said, we've got to move fast, but what does that look like in terms of needs assessment?
You'll see it in both 22 and 23 budget. We're in the latter phases now of necking down what we're going to procure to put on board a ship, provide the ISR, and maybe multiple payloads off of a ship. The other construct is an unmanned series of vessels that launches an unmanned swarm of aerial vehicles. Why would we not try to do that? We should never put, if we're going to cross a beach, go somewhere, we should send a machine where we can to do the reconnaissance, to take a look before we ever send the first human.
Cost-effective and strategically increasing capabilities. I yield back the balance of my time. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our gentlemen here today for your leadership and taking care of the world's greatest sailors and Marines. Admiral Gilday, first question for you. 3 years ago, we had a serious readiness problem, and the numbers we were using is only 50% of the aircraft in the Navy could fly on any given day. Now, we've had 3 years where we restored roughly 60% of the budget from what we had from 2010 cuts. Could you just give us some feedback? How are we doing with the aircraft readiness? Do we have a very noticeable improvement with the last 3 years' budgets?
Very noticeable improvement. So we're at over 80% right now, sustained with Super Hornets in terms of mission-capable aircraft. And I was just down in Norfolk recently at the operations center, where they actually bring together all the maintenance officers from the wings, and they bring them together to get after constraints or getting ready aircraft back on the flight line. And so includes bringing together the folks from DLA, the folks from the Navy Supply System, engineers from NavAir. And so we've really brought the team together, ironed out some process issues that we've had, and significantly increased readiness.
Is there a way that we could quantify, that was the F-18s when you say 80%? I'd like to be able to go back to our constituents and say, 3 years ago, 50% across the board. Today, we're 75%, or whatever it may be, broader than, say, just the F-18. Because I think that was important. Readiness is vital.
So, sir, if I hear you, are you talking by each type model series?
What was the composite number, the 50% or a cumulative number of all the Navy aircraft?
So I was really talking about the focus initially has been Super Hornets.
Okay.
And so we've been at 50, 55% for a decade. Now we're at 80%, above 80% sustained. We're bringing those same processes into the other type model series aircraft to bring them back, to bring them over 80% sustained as well. Okay.
Thank you. I want to go to electronic warfare. It's something I've been involved with for about 3 decades, and we've fallen significantly behind as a department in each of our services. I appreciate the Navy's focus on it even while I was in the service. I think you had your sights on it all along. The Joint Staff has appointed a 2-star now to lead their EW program. The Air Force has a 1-star. They created a panel for funding, so it's a separate funding process. What is the Navy and the Marines or the department doing to raise the bar here for electronic warfare? Because to me, it's a physical domain that we have to control. We can control the ground, the sea, the air, but if we can't talk, can't use the radars, we're in trouble. So I appreciate your feedback.
Sir, 2 years ago, I think it was, General Neller talked with us about the need to move into the information environment, electronic warfare, MISO, cyber, and military deception faster. He traded, intentionally, deliberately traded a 3-star billet from a command and created a 3-star General Lori Reynolds, who oversees that for us. You know, you wish you could go back 2 years and thank him for that, because right now she is incredibly far out in front of the rest of us, telling us where we need to go. And not just in one area, EW, but how do you integrate those domains and make it a warfighting capability? So on our staff, on our headquarters, Marine Corps, smaller staff, a Lieutenant General, Lori.
Thank you. Admiral or Secretary, however you want to do it.
Well, I think I'll ask the CNO to talk about this as well, sir, but I think one of the things that we're emphasizing at the department level is to ensure that the Navy and Marine Corps are more integrated in this process going forward, as well as how we integrate with the overall joint force. And there's a lot of emphasis being placed on that at the OSD level as well.
So we stood up the Information Warfare Development Command down in Norfolk, and so it brings together cyber, electronic maneuver warfare, and space into a single warfare development center that actually creates tactics and operating procedures for the fleet. We're testing that in a big exercise. We're testing a lot of that in a big exercise this summer and throughout the deployments that we make. We have put together an IW commander on board our carrier strike groups and our amphibious readiness groups. So that again brings together space, cyber, and EW. We're doing it at the fleet command level based on what we learned there. And the Commandant is integrating with his expeditionary advanced basing concept, non-kinetic into the fight from the shore.
Do you have a single belly button, if you will, in the Navy that solve things EW?
So we have a 3-star in charge of programs on my staff. We have the 1-star down in Norfolk that at the tactical level is bringing those concepts together.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back, and thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. And I'd like to yield just a moment to the ranking member, Mr. Thornberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you often, rightfully, acknowledge the key contributions to not only our committee, but to the country's national security by the members of the staff of this committee. In my experience, working on 26 years, there is no staff member who has exhibited greater professionalism, dedication to the mission, tolerance and patience with members and our inadequacies than Pete Villano. He's about to leave the committee imminently, and so I think it's appropriate to just take a moment to specifically thank and acknowledge his many contributions to this committee and our work over the years, but also to hold him up as a shining example of the tremendous staff that enable us to do what we do. I yield back.
Thank you. And I want to echo those remarks. In particular, I think it's noteworthy that Pete he's worked for both of us. And that is a key part of this committee, which, by the way, is unlike any other committee in Congress. We are bipartisan, and the staff is more responsible for keeping that in place than anyone, and Pete exemplifies that. So, 26, how was it, 24 years? I forget. 26 total years of service. So I want to recognize that service, and thank you very much. Give him a round of applause. Thank you very much. Resuming the questioning, we will go to Ms. Houlihan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will also take my turn to ask my parochial and provincial question. My community is home to the Sikorsky facility that manufactures the VH-92, known as Marine One, and you all know that last year Sikorsky announced its intention to close that facility and consolidate operations in other locations, and I at that time was a very vocal opponent, joining with other members of our Pennsylvania delegation, asking Sikorsky to reverse that decision and to have an enduring commitment to the city of Coatesville, which is where that factory is. And thankfully, the President also shared this view, and Lockheed announced very soon after, in July in 2019, that it would keep the plant open, and at least as long as it had work on the VH-92 program, it would remain so. So I have two questions. I think probably the Admiral would be most likely the appropriate person to ask the first one. Last year, I placed into Section 133 of the NDAA a requirement for the Navy to report to Congress on its assessment of what the facility's closure would mean for the program, and we received this response in January. And this much of it is the assignment, and this is the answer. And I was a program manager in the Air Force, and I was also a chemistry teacher in 11th grade. And on both counts, I think this would merit an F in terms of effort. And I was wondering if you could maybe provide a little bit more insight onto what the implications would be, because in all likelihood, the factory at some point will be closed and moved, and was hoping you might be able to provide me some more insight than this report does.
Ma'am, I don't think that I signed that report. I don't think that I've seen it. And so if I could take that for the record or set up a meeting to come back and get schooled in it myself, and then so I can adequately answer your questions.
I would really appreciate that, because I really would love to have a more robust answer to a really important question. And my second question is for General Berger. I understand that the Marine Corps Aviation Plan had originally called for 2 additional CH-92A, which are the trainer aircraft. Having dedicated training aircraft obviously helps to relieve the burden on the regular fleet. And I noticed that funding for this was struck in this budgetary process. And I was wondering if there was a plan for that to eventually be added, why that was decided to be struck, if you could provide some insight into that as well.
The requirement remains 2, ma'am. You're accurate. 1 we have right now down at Quantico, 1 simulator. The requirement is a second one. So that part remains valid. We will need to find the funding for it, because as we field the 92, we're going to need 2 simulators, not 1.
And I guess I appreciate that, elevate my concern that if this particular facility, which is charged currently with this manufacturing, is in fact at some point going to be shuttered because of lack of demand, we really need to make sure we understand that demand shortly so that we don't end up with a difficult problem. That is the bulk of my questions, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm concerned about reports about the Chinese and Russian militaries investing heavily in their submarine fleets with subs that can deploy longer and have more lethal weapon systems. They are increasing their activity in the North Atlantic region, and at the rate China is building and currently commissioning ships, its Navy could have 100 submarines within the next 15 years. The Navy has validated warfighting requirements of 138 P-8 Poseidons, the only long-range aircraft that can detect and track deep-water submarines, as previously attested to by the Secretary and the Admiral this morning. My question is, has the Navy performed any risk assessment of not reaching the warfighting requirement for P-8s?
Sir, I'd have to get back to you on specifically with respect to P-8s, but I think P-8s would be part of a broader set of capabilities that we would use against that submarine buildup. But I'll have to get back to you with more specifics.
Okay, I appreciate that. Furthermore, what does the shortfall of P-8 mean for the stockpile of associated capabilities that are necessary for anti-submarine warfare missions such as sonobuoys?
Sir, I lost the connection there between sonobuoys and the...
What does the shortfall of P-8s mean for sonobuoys?
So I'm concerned about numbers of sonobuoys and have added that to my unfunded list. In terms of P-8s and the risk there, I think there's a direct risk to warfighting capability and capacity based on numbers. And so I think I can get back to you as part of that previous question and tie it together.
All right, appreciate that very much. You already heard from Representative Moulton a little bit about the Future of Defense Task Force that he and I co-chair. We are working closely with DoD and members of the National Security Innovation Base to identify opportunities to invest in our future force structure. Mr. Secretary, in your testimony, you state, quote, "There is clear agreement that certain new classes of ships that currently do not exist today must be designed and built rapidly in the next 10 years," end quote. What role do you see unmanned undersea vehicles systems playing in a conflict with Russia and China?
Sir, I think they're going to play a role. And I think what we need to do, the work that we need to do now, and this is largely where there are some disagreements between the analysis that we've done, the analysis that CAPE has done, the analysis that think tanks like CSBA has done, is how do you scale, what's the scale of that unmanned piece of the mission? And the numbers vary. From my perspective right now, we're in this point in time, I don't think that difference in numbers is that significant, because we have to get after it now anyway, and it's going to take time to get to that size of force. But I think we all agree that unmanned platforms are going to have a role to play, whether they're undersea unmanned platforms, large ones, medium-sized ones, small ones. They are going to be part of the future force mix that we're going to design.
Can you comment a little bit further on the readiness of U.S. citizens studying STEM professions and how that impacts your ability to prepare the Navy for the future?
I think it's a huge strategic problem for us that we don't have enough students. We're not generating enough students out of secondary education to meet those needs. I haven't studied it, but I've seen some statistics on it. And when you look at what particularly our biggest long-term competitor is doing, we have significant challenges there. And it limits the types of input that we have into our force.
Okay, I appreciate that. Mr. Secretary, in reference to a subject that Congressman Lamborn brought up earlier, what is the Navy's plan to proliferate conventional prompt strike and hypersonic weapons across the force in order to prevent them from being solely held within our submarine force?
Sir, we'd have to come back and give you a classified briefing on that in terms of how we plan on deploying these. There are lots of different options that we're looking at, but I really can't discuss that in an open forum. But we'd be more than happy to come and do that in a classified forum.
We look forward to that. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions. Admiral Gilday, I've sat here throughout this whole hearing just to get to this. Earlier today, you mentioned that Portsmouth is in New Hampshire. I just had to point out that the entrance to Portsmouth Naval Shipyard is in Kittery, Maine. And most of that shipyard, you know, I wouldn't let you get away with that. Most of the shipyard is in Maine, and we're proud of it and proud to share it with New Hampshire. But more seriously, you've sat in front of the Sea Power Subcommittee in the last year. We've had conversations about your excitement about the DDG Flight 3 and how important getting that platform out into the Navy is. I also noticed that in the FY21 budget request, there's $46 million for industry studies regarding the next large surface combatant, but that is a ways out there. You've testified today about how a lot of the platforms we have right now are going to be with us for a while, and as a result, you're going to be investing in upgrading the systems that you have. And with that in mind, I wanted to remind you that the current multi-year procurement for DDG 51 runs out in FY 2022, and therefore wanted to ask both the Secretary and yourself what your plans are regarding an FY 23 multi-year procurement contract for DDG 51 Flight 3s.
Right now, sir, I can't speak to a detailed plan for a multi-year procurement of DDG 51 Flight 3s in 23. I think that would really be dependent upon the integrated force structure assessment that we've done, and then prioritizing within that in terms of what we need to move forward on quickly, given the top line that we have. And I don't mean to be evasive, it's just I don't have a firm answer to that yet.
If I may just add to that, the multi-year procurements give us tremendous flexibility to purchase these ships, these long lead time ships, and reduce the cost of them over time. And so we are very much in favor of using that authority whenever we possibly can. So.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and would love to work with you on that as we plan for the future, because I think you made the point, Mr. Secretary, it drives down the cost of the ships. I'd be surprised. Obviously, I don't know what the force assessment is going to look like, but I've heard an awful lot of good testimony about the importance of the DDG destroyer as the Cadillac of the Navy, the backbone of the force. I'd be shocked to see a dramatic shift. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I think that'd be an interesting conversation. General Berger, I wanted to just ask you, in your planning guidance, you made this quote: Marines cannot be passive passengers en route to the amphibious objective area as long-range precision standoff weapons improve and diffuse along the world's littorals. Marines must contribute to the fight alongside our Navy shipmates from the moment we embark. I also have heard you talk about having a distributed force. You've talked about land-based anti-ship weapons and being able to reach out and touch the enemy. I also can't imagine you envision a Marine Corps infantry that is not able to go ashore and tangle with the best of them. So this is not a gotcha question, but during your nomination, you testified that you would continue the Marine Corps support for the Close Combat Lethality Task Force. I also wanted to point out that Secretary Esper basically committed the same, saying that the cross-functional nature of the CCLTF increases coordination of effort department-wide. For those people listening that don't know, this is an effort to strengthen the lethality, survivability, resiliency, and readiness of U.S. squad-level infantry units to ensure close combat overmatch against pacing threats. Yet there's a proposal to just move this into the Army and not keep it a shared joint services effort. I can't imagine that much has changed, but I did want to ask because it seems like a pretty rapid shift away from where we were just 6 months ago.
So we benefited from the work they've done so far because we were part of it. And inside this budget, plus a very small unfunded priority list for the Marine Corps, 44% of that unfunded stuff is individual Marine stuff, from the individual combat equipment for reservists to suppressors and night optics. But we have been the beneficiary of that. We have to continue that. We cannot let that flounder again. Not because we're going to put 10,000 Marines across a beach. We're not going to relive 1944 or 1945, but because the way you describe it, we have to first deter, but if that doesn't work, be prepared to distribute a force ashore or afloat, either one. And then it's going to always boil down to a small unit leader, and we have to outfit that small unit leader and his team with the very best we can.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mr. Walls.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Modly, before I get into my broader strategic and parochial questions, I just wanted to note that several members of the Florida delegation wrote you regarding the awarding of Purple Hearts to those wounded during the December terrorist attack on Pensacola NAS, and asking you to review whether any of those personnel merit Valor Awards. As a combat veteran, I certainly saw valor in the actions of many to protect their fellow sailors and civilians. So I understand the Valor Awards are still under review, but I wanted to thank you for awarding several Purple Hearts to the victims of that horrific attack. I just want to echo quickly my colleagues, Representative Gallego, Representative Banks, the concerns of the burgeoning qualitative and quantitative Chinese and Russian fleets. Lots of discussion of the Virginia, lots of discussion of the Columbia. Obviously, that's a key part of our deterrent. Moscow and Beijing, I think, feel the same way. So taking a look at the P-8s and just following up on Representative Banks, we have a reserve squadron. The P-3s are so old that I guess we're retiring those even without replacements. Well, what's the bottom line and where you need to go on the total numbers of P-8s and how and when are we going to get there? And I know that is a piece of the ASW fight, but I think it's a pretty critical one.
Sir, we're not abandoning P3s without a replacement. So P8s are coming online and replacing those P3s. In the late 20s, that inventory will be closed, fully closed.
Admiral, my understanding is that the reserve squadron in Jacksonville, Florida, is going to decommission before they get P8s. If we could, I would be happy to be wrong on that. If you could just follow up for the record.
I will come back to you on that, sir. But I also take a look at whether or not that's being replaced in a different area with a different squadron. But I'll get back to it.
Thank you. And then on the sonobuoy piece, and again, you could take this for the record as well if you don't have the detail. As we looked at it, you request $49 million to recapitalize the newest version, the SSQ 125A. My understanding, that's not in production yet. So we're confused on basically, if you could come back to us and explain why we're recapping a sonobuoy that's not in production versus replenishing the stocks and continuing to replenish the stocks, which I think this committee has supported you in doing in the last few years, but that seems to us to be a disconnect for replenishing something that's not in production yet. If you could come back to us on that, I'd appreciate it, Admiral. And then, I just have a broader strategic top-line question that I'm asking of all of the services. I mean, and the Secretary and Chairman. We're looking at a flat top-line budget. We're looking at increasing personnel costs. How? I still am not clear, and I think this is the broader strategic question we're all asking. How are we going to modernize? How are we going to recap? And how are we going to procure when our personnel costs continue in the out year and the fight up to eat up more and more of a flat top line? I'm having trouble kind of circling that square. If you could speak to that, and then in the time remaining, I completely agree. There's a quality and quantity. Are you looking at any types of pulling anything out of mothball or modernizing any from the hazard frigates or anything along those lines of kind of really getting out of the box to keep up with the pace that the Chinese are cranking out ships?
So I think, sir, the best way to answer that first question, from my perspective, is we have to look internally at our own organization. And there are many things that we do, the way we operate, the way our business processes are set up, the business system structures that we have, that inhibit our organization to be as agile as it needs to be. And there's cost associated with that. There are overhead structures that are associated with that we don't need to have. And we need to funnel that into modernization. I think ultimately we can dig very deep to find some of that, but at some point there's going to have to be a broader discussion about a higher top line for the Navy. And that's something that I'm trying to queue up, but I can't.
Just in the time, thank you for that candor. And the other piece, again, I'm on the Future Defense Task Force as well in my remaining 10 seconds. If we're moving long-term to more and more lightly manned and unmanned systems, but we have the long-term personnel costs that are eating up that budget, how, if you could come back for the record of how, where those intersections come, is it 5 years, 10 years, and how do we accelerate it?
Happy to do so.
Thank you.
And I think a number of members have hit upon this point, but I think that is a crucial question, is making the budget work for what we want to do. Make sure we don't overextend ourselves so we wind up not doing anything well. If we have the money, we have the money. If we don't, we have to figure out how to make it work. And I think a lot of us, and you as well, are struggling to get the right answers on that. And that will inform a lot of what we do in this year's defense bill. Ms. Laurie.
Secretary Modly, I wanted to start with a comment that you made recently, and this is a quote. You said, "The service needs to settle on a North Star and begin the research and development and construction to get the hulls in the water, and then it could refine its vision as needed once fleet leaders understand how the new and old ships work together to bring naval power to a distributed fight." So, I read this, and what do you think it sounds like to me? It sounds like the LCS program, the DDG 1000, it sounds like the Ford, it sounds like the conversations we're having about unmanned surface vessels. So, I just wanted to point out the fact that, we've had class after class after class of ship procurement and construction that has essentially failed. And it's failed us in providing national defense, presence, deterrence overseas, and it's failed the sailors who are working on those ships. They're the ones who are doing the right thing, but we're giving them platforms that can't do the job, that are not fully developed, that are not mature and designed before we start building them. And so in that discussion, I want to discuss the LCS. So in 2018, Vice Admiral Brown, Commander Naval Surface Forces, said, these ships bring unmatched capability to our surface navy and provide flexibility to our fleet commanders. So in your assessment, do you agree with Vice Admiral Brown that these have brought us unmatched flexibility? And would you say the LCS is a success or a failure?
Well, ma'am, I think it's too early to say whether or not they're a success or a failure.
No,
I think right
it's
now,
too early to tell. You want to decommission the first 4 ships in the class, and it's too early to tell. We're going to go through, and we're going to start decommissioning them when the oldest one is 12 years old. And I'll quote Admiral Gilday gave, I think, a good assessment of what they turned out to be at the Shipbuilding Caucus breakfast a couple weeks ago, that they were just prototypes, because we built them and then we figured out that they didn't work. So is this like a we'll build it and then they'll come mentality that the Navy has? Is this your plan for the FFG, the large surface combatant? What is the plan of the Navy to develop platforms and ships that actually do the mission? And I'm going to stop there because it's a somewhat rhetorical question and can never be possibly answered in 5 minutes. But what I'm going to move on to is this entire discussion about 355 ships. So since I've been here, what I've been talking about is how did we get to the 355 number? We got to it through the OFRP. And the OFRP moved us from deploying 6 out of every 24 months, so 25% of the time, to 6 out of every 36 months, 17% of the time. I'm not that smart with math, but I am a Navy nuke, and I can do the math backwards, and 355, if you do the math backwards, at 25% of the time, it works out you only needed 282 ships to do the same thing presence-wise before you went down in the amount of time they're deployed. So honestly, a force structure assessment and a 30-year shipbuilding plan that are based off of an assumption that we're only going to deploy approximately 17% of the time, or 6 or 7 out of 36 months, it doesn't work. It gets us to 355. And, I've been struggling to do your math because you said we could get to 355 ships by the end of this decade. I mean, do you have proof that our industrial base could even do that if we threw all the money that the taxpayers had at it? Would it even be physically possible?
I think it's possible, and I mentioned before, ma'am, what I
So
think it
it's
would
possible in the plan that we haven't seen yet. It tells us how to get to 355 in a decade.
take. I will be able to tell you how I think we can get there. Yes, ma'am. But many of your points are valid, but some aren't. The first 2 LCS ships were not designed to be operational ships. They were test ships.
Is that what was testified to Congress when you came and asked us to pay a bill? And the American taxpayer to pay for ships, you told us you wanted to build 2 ships that weren't going to be operational, that were never going to deploy, and then you send sailors there and expect them to operate these and put all of their blood, sweat, and tears into operating the ships that are never going to deploy?
The first 2 were purchased with R&D dollars, which meant they were research and development ships. So I think I was not here.
Okay,
but
so then
that
are they
sounds
being
to me like it
counted?
was
If
pretty
they're
clear that
R&D
it
ships and they're just prototype test platforms, are you counting them in the 293 of 355 that we have right now?
They're part of the
Are they operational fleet ships?
Yeah, yes.
So then I don't buy that answer. They're operational fleet ships. They can't deploy. We were going to have warfare modules for them that were going to bring us a whole bunch of capability. But guess what? We didn't even develop those, and we're still not operational at this point. Is that correct?
Some of them are. Some of them are operating right now. Some of them are doing operations out in the South China Sea right now. So they're out there and they're doing things.
So they're out there and they're doing things. So was it the agile, flexible platform that was going to solve all the Navy's problems? When I see this mystery 30-year shipbuilding plan, is it all LCSs?
No, ma'am, and I don't think anyone ever said that it was going to solve all the Navy's problems. I think it was a new capability that would address certain problems in certain areas that other more expensive ships, that it was too expensive to do with those other ships. That's what it was designed to do.
Time has expired. I think this is an incredibly important point, and a much more forceful and articulate way of getting at what I was trying to get at in my opening statement is the 355 number kind of offends me because it doesn't get into this, and this is what matters. You could have 355 rowboats, theoretically, and you'd have 355 ships. So I don't even know why we put that number out there. I would much rather see, here are the capabilities that we need to have. And, yes, I take your point about R&D ships, but you can't really count an R&D ship as part of the 355 ship fleet if you're being honest about it, or if you're not just trying to hit an artificial number. It's about the capabilities. And also, I think and you gentlemen have worked very hard on this and made it better, it's about, okay, we have it, can we use it? And that's really important. And I know you focused on that. You focused on the maintenance. You focused on those issues. That just seems to me like a lot more important than spending all your time, trying to come up with some chart that shows we can get to 355 ships. The point is much more the capabilities and the deployability. Just my 2 cents worth. Mr. Bergman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Am I tail end Charlie here?
I beg your pardon?
Am I the last man standing?
At the moment, though you never know who's going to show up.
Well, potentially then the only thing standing between you all and what you're going to get on to next today, I'll try to be short, sweet, and to the point, but it will take 5 minutes. So the point is, historically, we have heard the phrase used, there is no one more adaptable and creative than a Marine in a firefight. Conversely, personal experience tells me there is no one less adaptable than that same Marine within a change-resistant bureaucracy. As I look at today's DoD and service bureaucracies, I see experienced, motivated, digitally savvy young service members held back by analog bureaucrats who are change-resistant. That's just the perspective of 40 years in uniform, whether it be active duty or reserve. There's good news, because we have these service members, these young men and women, who they're there to fight. They're there to defend our country's interests at all costs. It's up to us to do the right thing to enable them and then not stifle them after they've gotten the experience that they can be productive in a changing environment that is always going to be changing. So, General Berger, I know it was mentioned before I got here, you're going to propose the Marine Corps is proposing cuts of about 2,000 personnel in the FY21 budget request. You've indicated what your goal is. I guess my question is, with the proposed cuts to manning, is the Marine Corps considering increased use of shared services, whether it be on the admin side, the fiscal side, where you don't need commands at all levels to have that completely filled out shop, that you can actually streamline your outputs for, again, HR stuff and fiscal stuff by utilizing the shared services. Can you want to make a comment, or are you ready to, and if you're not, I mean, we can talk about it, take it for the record, because I'd like to hear what you're thinking.
The force design efforts started with the warfighting end. So most of the adjustments to how we're built had to do with warfighting, and part of that, to your point, sir, was where we ought to integrate with the Navy in a personnel manner. In other words, at the numbered fleet, do we have it right? Because right now, today, a numbered fleet has one Marine colonel. We got to do a lot different than that going forward. So it's not for the sake of efficiencies, it's for the sake of warfighting. After that, where do we go inside the Title 10 headquarters, all of the headquarters between us and a battalion squadron? We have to look at all of that, yes. Have we looked at it through the lens of where we could deliberately look for services elsewhere? We have not yet, no.
Okay, thank you. And also for both, and again, not necessarily to be answered right now, but for both Admiral Gilday and General Berger, we now use the term operational reserve, because since we can go back in the history since after Korea, where we didn't populate the Guard and Reserve with equipment or resources necessary to keep them ready to the point where if we needed to use them, they were ready to go when we needed them. Well, the last 20 plus years, we have seen the value of an operational reserve. So having said that, when we think about HDLD assets, high demand, low density, quick turn on the deployments, things, and now we're talking active component assets, Intel, cyber, IT, for example. We know we're not going to keep those corporals and sergeants because the pay is too good and the opportunity is too great in the outside world, so we train them up. They serve their time honorably. They do the job well. So I would just encourage you to be looking at how do you take those highly trained, capable assets and keep their viability? It's different in an infantry battalion, but those kind of assets we need to keep for as long as possible. And there's only one place to keep them if they leave active duty, and that's a reserve capability, appropriately led by people who understand what it takes to be a reservist who is committed to a career after their service. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe we are done, but thank you, gentlemen, very much. Appreciate your service, appreciate your testimony, and we'll continue to work on this as we prepare the bill for this year. And with that, we are adjourned.